Hello, I'm Mark Tucker,
Hello, I'm Alan Furstenberg, and we are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Hello, Ellen.
Hello, Mark. Always good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. You know what? We haven't had a chance to connect on this yet, and I was wanting to ask you about your experience with the hackathon, the prompt hacks.
The Prompt Hacks Hackathon, which was a great hackathon I was part of recently. It was organized by VoiceFlow, which is a company that we keep saying we need to talk more about. So maybe we'll
Yes.
we'll get into them a little bit during this. But I suspect we're going to be revisiting them again in the future. Um, that kind of had a goal of wanting people to learn more about prompt engineering and integrating some of the new AI tools that are out there with various other tools and making something good. So that was a fun experience, and I learned an awful lot from it. And we'll get into some of what I learned as well.
Well,
Um,
and part of the impetus of the hackathon is that VoiceFlow has been kind of on the forefront of taking their tool, which is a number of years old and have been a leader for no code, low code tools for doing chatbots and voice assistants and prototyping, and they have implemented a lot of the latest large language model, GPT prompts, and experiences into various aspects of that. And so I
but
think the kind of it was twofold is to one, get people who might not have gotten into this area of AI recently into it and learn about what does it mean to use prompts and LLMs, but also to kind of showcase how those things have been integrated into VoiceFlow itself.
right. Well, one of the important things to note, though, is that VoiceFlow wasn't a required tool. You didn't need to use VoiceFlow for the hackathon, but they made licenses available. If you got the licenses, you had tokens to GPT available. There were certainly things that were easy to do. So if you weren't familiar at all with any of this, VoiceFlow made lots and lots of things so much easier. Um, and yeah, it really highlighted really well exactly what the tool can do, how it dovetailed into large language models. And since then, they've been talking about other additions that the VoiceFlow is picking up in that space. It's rapidly becoming almost the graphical version of LangChain in a lot of ways.
Oh, that's interesting. We definitely really need to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean it's not there yet. It's not LangChain. LangChain is a whole lot more. But you can see they're starting to say, hey, here are some common tasks that you're going to want to do. Let's do it visually.
Right. Well, very cool. So let's spend just a couple of minutes before we kind of dive into what your project was and how all that went. For those that maybe are listening or watching that haven't participated in a hackathon before, can you kind of just talk about what a hackathon is and kind of at a high level how it goes? What's kind of the boundaries of because you spend a weekend on this, so maybe kind of talk a little bit about what that all meant.
Sure. So the first thing to understand is that hackathons do take on different structures and forms. So nothing here is fixed in stone. But that said, they broadly speaking, they're focused around a topic. And that topic could be something like, building for good,
Yep.
or it could be around a particular tool. So it could be around something like VoiceFlow or a particular library, or when I was first getting involved in Glass, we had a Glass hackathon to learn how to use it and then to spend some focused time developing for it. When I started with the assistant, we ran hackathons to get people to focus on the technology around building for the assistant. So normally they're focused around something like that. Usually they're organized so that there are experts on hand to help people who don't know what they're doing, who are just learning this a particular technology, because part of the point is to learn the technology.
Yeah.
And they also generally are focused around a relatively limited time frame. You know, when we were doing all of these in person a lot, it would be, you know, a weekend, and you would show up on a Friday night and make teams and go to it, and, you know, by Sunday morning you had to have something to show. These days that tends to stretch a little bit more. So you'll see, you know, hackathons that are run from home, that you have, you know, 3 weeks to work on. There are good reasons for those, to be sure, but I like the limited time ones, because it really makes you say, I'm interested in this, I'm going to focus on this.
Yeah.
And I can spare 24, 36 hours, whatever, of solid focused time to get as much as I can done, to learn what I can out of this, and then to go from there. So usually your goal is you'll work with some teams or work alone. And at the end, you need to be able to demonstrate what it is that you're doing or that you've done in a very, very sketchy, rough prototype thing. It's not expected, you know, you're not, this isn't an MVP here. This isn't a minimum viable product. This is I learned something, and here's what I'm going to do with it, and here's where it goes next type thing. You know, so that's kind of the thought process around what hackathons are for. And I went into this hackathon saying, you know, I've never done much programming with prompts. I've played with prompts, but I've never done much programming with them. I never actually played with VoiceFlow before. You know, that was a brand new tool to me. And then seeing also what other tools were there that I could pick up on and play with. One of the other ones that I've dealt with before is something called AppScript from Google. And I've used it before, but there have been a lot of changes since I last used it. So I figured this would be a good opportunity for me to play with that. So my biggest focus was on learning these 3 things, and then applying it to a problem domain that was very personal to me, very, very near and dear to my heart, let's say.
So, and there are some types of prizes. Usually there's some sort of a, you know, bragging rights and sometimes financial compensation for winning entries.
This is true. There are usually some prizes of some sort, and the prize itself varies from hackathon to hackathon. I wouldn't begin to say what's normal and what's not normal.
Yeah. No, I do have a question. So how did you hear about this hackathon? How would somebody find out about them?
That's actually a really good question. So I heard about this particular one because VoiceFlow was advertising it. And I know, you know, I follow VoiceFlow and several of the people in the company. So when they started pushing it, I'm like, yeah, that seems like a reasonable thing to go for.
Was this LinkedIn, Twitter? Where
it was on LinkedIn and Twitter that I saw it.
Okay.
But I would point out that one of the tools that they used was a site called DevPost. And this site is really, you know, a lot of hackathons organize on this site. And if you sign up for the site, you can just say things like, well, what hackathons are coming up? What are the terms of them? What are the rules, the criteria? What are the prizes? So if you're, you know, if you're trying to get out there and learn a bunch of stuff or prove that you know what you're doing, it's a great place to go to find challenges like this.
I've participated in some hackathons before. I've used DevPost. It's a good site to, you know, register and kind of do all the stuff that you need for a hackathon. And so it's a good site to check out if you're interested in more. So tell us about the idea that you came up with and kind of how you came up with the idea.
That's a good one. So people who have watched the show before or in the past, or people who have hung out with me for more than about 15 minutes, know that I've got something that I built for the Google Assistant called Voodoo Drive. And this is a project actually that goes back over 10 years now. It was my first project for Google Glass as well, an earlier variant on it. And what Voodoo Drive lets you do is open up a spreadsheet and issue some voice commands to both be able to add data to it, add rows to your spreadsheet, and get some information about the most recent row in your spreadsheet. And this includes, whatever formula has been calculated, whatever data has been entered there. And I use this all the time. The kind of downside to it is that the conversations that you have with your spreadsheet are a little bit stilted. It's things like add a row, set weight to 185. So it's there, it's valid, it feels sort of conversational in many ways. But the prompt designer, the person who was designing the NLU and all of the prompts that go into the intents and so forth, clearly didn't know what they were doing, because it feels very stilted. I'd point out that person is me. So I am not a great conversation designer, but it was okay. And it was enough to get started and to start realizing what needed to be done better. And most of the time when I would demonstrate this to people, one of the questions that people would inevitably say is, that's really cool. Can I do things like ask it what my average weight was last month? Or how much weight I lost this week? And I'd say, no, you can't. It's a wonderful idea. But unless you've already put that formula into a column, it can't do it. And there were workarounds and there were other, but it really fundamentally just wasn't quite there.
So the kind of the main, or like the sweet spot of Voodoo Drive was adding a row to like track something, log something, and then ask information about the current row. Was that
exactly
the main focus of it?
Yep. And we can demonstrate that if we'd like.
Okay.
Can we take a look?
Yeah.
Hey, Google, ask Voodoo Drive to open demo weight.
I've opened the spreadsheet named demo weight. What would you like to do now?
Add a row.
Okay, I've added a new row. What would you like to do next?
Set weight.
What would you like to set weight to?
190.
Weight is now 190. What would you like to do now?
Change it to 189.
Okay, I've set weight to 189. What would you like to do next?
What is the difference?
Difference is currently up 1. What would you like to do now?
Quit.
Thank you for using Voodoo Drive.
So you can see with that, it's got an okay conversation. It does some things smart, like, I could say change it, and it knows what the last value that I added was, and let me change it. But it felt stilted. I could ask for the difference column. But it still didn't quite feel like it was there.
So for example, the only reason why it could answer up 1 is because the calculation in the column had the value of up 1, right?
Right. That's what the formula said, or that's what the formula was designed to either say, up or down.
So it's really reading cell values. It's not necessarily understanding the data behind it.
No. All that it really understands are what the columns, the column headers are, and which row we're on.
Okay.
And you can go back to our previous episode where I go into some of it in a little more detail. But even with that, it's pretty cool and it's pretty powerful, but I wanted more. And for a long time I've wanted more, but there was no good way to do that.
Right.
But one of the things I started to realize is that large language models gave us the opportunity to take this fuzzy notion of what a human said and turn it into something more concrete, a formula. And once I have a formula, I can now put that into the spreadsheet and have it calculate the value for me.
Okay.
And that's what I started experimenting with for what I was calling Voodoo AI. And the nifty element of this was that it does the whole thing. It uses an LLM to take what a person says or types in this case, turns that into a formula behind the scenes, plugs that formula into the spreadsheet, gets the value out from the spreadsheet, and with that value, plus what I had originally asked, turns that into something to say back to me.
Oh, interesting.
So, should we take a look at that?
Yeah, let's do that.
So what we're looking at here is what VoiceFlow calls their prototype mode. This isn't a full-scale production-ready thing, but it's really good for demonstrating it to other people or trying it out and just kind of getting a feel for how it works. So I can tell it to start a conversation. And I had hooked it up to two different spreadsheets. So we're going to go back to the weight one that we were just playing with. And now it prompts us, what do we need to know? So I can say something like, what was my average weight in April? And it comes back and tells me that my average weight in April was 186.81 pounds.
Wow.
Okay. So now let's take a look at how it did that. On the Google Sheet, there's another tab that's the Query tab. So in the Query tab, it goes and creates a new row for every invocation of Voodoo AI. And in that, it takes things, including what did I say, or what did I type in? What was my average weight in April? And a cell that contains the formula that the LLM generated for that query description. It put that formula in the cell, reads that value out, then makes a copy of the value in case whatever, in case criteria change.
Right.
It has a read-only copy of it. Takes that value, takes the description, and feeds it back into an LLM, saying, the person's asked for this, this is the answer, say that in a way that sounds pleasant, basically. And that's how it turns those into your average weight in April was 186.81 pounds.
Wow.
There's a lot of kind of nifty things that it can do with this. So for example, I can ask questions like, was I heavier at the end of April than at the beginning of April? And it says, I was not heavier at the end of April than at the beginning of April. So let's see what it did there. It created a formula that, in this case, it looks like it subtracted the value at the end from the value at the beginning. And if it's greater than 0, and evaluates if, and sets a value of whether it's greater than 0 or not.
Okay.
So we can look at the end of April, I was 188. At the beginning of April, I was 190. So yes, at the end of April, I was not heavier than at the beginning. But notice something interesting here. I didn't ask it about weight. I didn't say the word weight anywhere in the question.
Yep.
I asked if I was heavier. And nowhere on the spreadsheet is the word heavier used. But the language model can associate the term heavier with the notion of what your weight is and put them together and to be able to come up with this kind of an answer. And I think overall that's, and then it took the fact that the result of the formula just says false. And it was able to turn something that is false into saying, no, you are not whatever you asked.
Yeah, it didn't say false.
Right. So it is able to take bunches of fuzzy concepts and put them together in ways that make sense to a person.
So I've got a question. Is this asking questions about your spreadsheet? And it does that with formulas, but can you do the same type of thing, like adding a row, that type of thing? Or is that a different, that wasn't the focus of this particular usage? Your usage was specifically asking questions about the spreadsheet as opposed to maintaining it.
So my goal in this particular one was just to see about what queries would look like. I figured I would need to build other prompts that would let me do things like add rows and add data that was a little bit fuzzier, because that requires a different set of skills. So for example, you can imagine that if you had a spreadsheet that recorded your blood pressure, under the way Voodoo Drive is now, you'd have to say, set systolic pressure to 120 and diastolic pressure to 70,
Yeah.
which is not how anybody talks.
That's true.
What you want to say is, set my blood pressure to 120 over 70. And you want the AI to be able to figure out from the fact that you've got columns labeled systolic and diastolic blood pressure,
Yeah.
and say, oh, 120 over 70 means these two values in these columns.
Okay.
So, again, this was the first step. It wasn't the minimum viable product. It's not, here's a whole bunch of new features that are rolling out into Voodoo Drive tomorrow for a number of reasons. But it was a first prototype to see, does it even make any sense to pursue this any further? And what I concluded really quickly was, yes, it is. It's not perfect. Every so often it will create a formula that is just wrong, because that's the fuzzy nature of how these large language models work. But everything that you say is logged in the spreadsheet. So you could go back and look at, why did it do this? What prompted it to come up with this bad formula? How is this formula bad?
Yeah.
And that was useful in a lot of ways, but it's a feature that I think is important, that we go back and be able to look at what was trying to be done here and what actually happened.
So let's dig a little bit into not quite the tech yet, because it sounds like there's obviously the way that you have to talk to the spreadsheet. There's things that you did inside of VoiceFlow to get the conversation, but it sounds like to me that there were two prompts.
There are two prompts.
One prompt was something that would evaluate the data in your spreadsheet and come up with a formula, and then something else that would take the answer after running the formula and the original question and formatting a friendly response.
Yes. You know what? Maybe this would be a good point for me to show you what it looks like in VoiceFlow.
Okay, if that would help, then that sounds good.
I think it will, because so let's take a look at that. So what we're looking at right now, I'm hoping you can see this okay.
It probably needs to be zoomed in just a little bit. Maybe when you get to a certain step, maybe.
Yeah, possibly, helps. But the overall flow is actually more interesting than when any of the boxes themselves are labeled.
Okay.
Big thing though to kind of get the high level view on this is the two boxes that are in blue are where we call out to the LLM with a prompt and we capture the response. And these boxes in green are API calls that do something with the spreadsheet. And they're actually calling AppScript, and AppScript is doing some work on the spreadsheet itself. And everything else in gray is either a prompt that is part of VoiceFlow, or it's some calculation that's being done internally in VoiceFlow using JavaScript.
Okay.
So broadly, we're moving from the upper left down to the lower right, and occasionally when we get somewhere, we'll loop back to an earlier part. The first thing that it does once you open the file is it gets the information about the spreadsheet. Basic things like, what's the name of the spreadsheet? What's the type, what's the sheet identifier? And then most importantly, what the column headers are. Because the column headers are kind of what we're talking about for most of this.
Yeah.
You can't really read that one, but it says, what would you like to know? So that's the prompt where it goes and tries to find out from the user, what do we want to ask it? What it does from there is then takes both what we have said, plus all of the column header information that we've acquired about this. What do we know about the spreadsheet? Everything that we know about the spreadsheet, plus some additional information like what's today's date. And it then builds a prompt from all of that information. And that's the prompt that it then sends out to the LLM. So this prompt contains, information like what's the current date, more information like here's what all of the column headers are, so column A is date and column B is weight and so forth and so on. Here's the user's question, write a formula that describes this question.
So that's interesting, because one of the things that I was thinking behind, kind of in my mind, I'm like, oh, he passes the entire spreadsheet and its contents to the LLM. It doesn't sound like that's true. You could have, one row, or you could have 10,000 rows, and it's not passing the actual row values.
No.
It's just what would be kind of the metadata associated with what's in the spreadsheet. So that's important, because with LLMs, you only have a certain size context that you can, pass, that includes, this is the data that I'm interested in, and then here is the thing I'm asking the LLM to do with that context. And so that's an important consideration, because it doesn't really it doesn't matter how large this spreadsheet grows over time. This part isn't going to grow. It's able to figure out from that input, or those inputs, those variables, what the formula is going to be that going to get sent into the spreadsheet, and that's pretty amazing. So,
That's well, you nailed it, and that's actually, I feel like, one of the most important things that we as developers need to start wrapping our heads around when it comes to these large language models. The other thing to remember about LLMs is they're bad at math.
yes.
So asking it, giving it a bunch of data and asking it to do math on this data is a bad idea. But what it's really good at is language. And what they were designed to do is transform language patterns into other language patterns.
Which could
Literally,
be code.
that's the T in GPT.
Yeah.
So if you tell it to transform an English phrase, in our case, into a formula, it has a pretty good chance of doing that.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because I've used that before with, like, I'm asking a question and these are the types of things I want to find out. Show me a sample of that code in JavaScript or TypeScript, or using this certain library, or I'd like this in a JSON. Here's the type of data I want. Generate some sample values in a JSON. So it speaks language well, and it speaks code well, and code could include data files, it could include code, and it could include spreadsheet formulas.
Right. And one of the things that's interesting is we see this pattern a lot actually with LangChain, is that a lot of people are doing this sort of thing and concluding with, write some code that does this. They then take that code and execute the code, which in some ways is fascinating, and in other ways is terrifying.
Yes.
And it's terrifying because, we've had this issue in software we've been talking for a couple of years now about concern about, making sure that our libraries, that we know the source of them and that they're not hiding something. And there's this big concern about that. And suddenly we're just going to ask an AI to, just give us some code that we're going to run.
Yeah, generate some code and run it. It's like, let's go rogue, or let's, there's all kinds of, I'm sure, hacking and things that could happen there that would all of a sudden run rampant against your code.
Yeah, it's just, have it suddenly start loading libraries that it doesn't need. There's concerning things in just arbitrarily executing code. and I'll be honest, as I was developing this, one of the things I tested was, okay, can I get it to generate a malicious Google Sheets function? And I couldn't. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. But there are certainly going to be some occasions where I'm going to have to look at the prompt that comes back and say, these are forbidden functions. If I see a function that does this, I'm going to block it.
Yeah. Well, and that's I think that's important for us to think through this, because we were like, for years we're like, oh, we don't want to have a SQL injection attack. We don't want to take the input directly and turn that into a SQL query. And there's all kinds of things that we did to solve that over the decades. And now, here's another chance where we're basically doing the same thing. We could do like a prompt injection, right?
Yeah.
And there's some things that they're working on to kind of handle that with the API, where it separates what the question is that the person asks versus what the command that you give to the AI is. But there's still concerns about.
There is, but there are things that are trying, but I feel like fundamentally there's now too much. There are only so many guardrails like that we can put in place.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of work. One of the presentations that we had at the hackathon was an explanation of what kinds of attacks are possible right now. That what is the state of art in prompt injections,
Yeah.
and some of them are interesting. And how do you defend against them? And some of them are interesting. There's only so much we can do. I think in this case, it's a controlled enough environment in some cases that it's hard to break outside of the limited bounds. And I tried, and I had others try as well. The worst that happens is you get something weird stuck into the spreadsheet that doesn't give you an answer. It doesn't have any broader implications than that.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to look at what it does once it gets this formula.
Yeah, so and I think that just to make the point is that it's a text input and a formula output. So we're so used to using something like ChatGPT where you type in text and the answer you get back is text. You don't put those boundaries on yourself. It doesn't have to be that.
Right. I mean, again, one of the way I like to think about these is these are transformers, and our goal is to either transform from something that is fuzzy into something concrete,
Mm-hmm.
or things that are concrete into something that is fuzzy. Because LLMs excel at that fuzziness part. It's the concrete part that humans are kind of so-so at, but we write programs that deal really well with those concrete parts.
Yeah.
So using the AI as that translator between the two can really be effective, I think. So let's look at where it does that and how it does that on this. So this blue box is where it turned the fuzzy human text into a formula.
Right.
It takes the result of that formula and does an API call to save it in the spreadsheet. And then as part of that, I made it all part of one single call. It then gets the result, what's now the value in that cell, and takes it and sends it back where it does another prompt. And this new prompt takes the original text, the original text that we said, plus the answer, and says, tell the person that's what this value is, and sends the response to us, and then goes back and starts over.
So prompt A is whatever we typed or said that was the question that we want to ask the spreadsheet, plus the metadata, column headers, the current date, that type of information. That's the input for the first one. The output is the formula.
Yep.
Then the formula is executed, and then that same original question that we asked the spreadsheet plus the answer that we got from running the formula in the spreadsheet together makes the prompt for the second call to the LLM that generates what the answer is. And with that second prompt, we could have said, oh, go
Well,
ahead.
to be clear, it doesn't generate what the answer is. It generates the response to the
True.
person.
It generates the text with the answer and the question. So it's like, here's the question, here's the answer. Can you say this? And you could just as easily said, can you say this in French? Or can you say this like Yoda? Or can you, right? So
Possibly. There are something, it behaves a little bit weird for some of those. I never tried the Yoda one. That's a good question that I should try. But we did try asking it questions in French and German. And it gave the correct answer in every case. Sometimes it would give the answer in English. Sometimes it would give it in whatever language you asked it in. Occasionally, it would say things like, in answer to your question here in quotes, the value is answer. And it was kind of non-deterministic how exactly it would respond, which is one of the challenges, as always is the case with LLMs.
Very cool.
Yeah, it was, in some cases, it really surprised me how well it worked. The first time I tried the prompt, it wasn't a perfect prompt, but even without a perfect prompt, it was giving me formulas that looked pretty reasonable in most cases.
Right. Now, so how does it with your spreadsheet, like for the previous month, you could have had 3 entries in that previous month, you could have had 30 entries. So how do you, I guess that's probably part of the instructions of the prompt, that it needs to do some lookups to try to figure out where the boundaries of a given month are, or?
Well, this is actually in some ways one of the beautiful parts. Let's go take a look at exactly what it did for that query.
Okay.
In this case, what it did was it uses an average ifs function, which I don't know terribly well, but what I believe it does, and we can look it up, is we can tell it a range that it's going to do the average over, broadly speaking. Then a criteria range. So within that, what is it checking against to evaluate it? And then we give it some criteria. So, we're saying evaluate this range to make sure that the date that's in there is after April 1st. And another criteria, making sure that that same range, the value is before April 30th. So that's acting as sort of a filter to figure out exactly which values, which rows to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And then only get the average for those rows.
Okay.
So it's not doing a VLOOKUP in this particular case. I'll be honest, in other times that I've run this exact same query, I've seen it do VLOOKUPs. I've seen it do matches. It's picking the formula. I'm not. I did have to try to convince it in some cases to do formulas that are smarter, that are more useful than others. So for example, I had to tell it that the date row is sorted, because this way, when it does certain VLOOKUPs and certain matches, it can take certain shortcuts to know that it's sorted versus not sorted.
Yeah, make some assumptions
So I had to include that as part of the prompt. And it still ignored that sometimes, to be honest, but it ignored it less often.
Very good. Yeah, so no, that's just interesting that it's figuring out just kind of what query to, and what, I guess formula to use in the spreadsheet, and doing it in such a way that it doesn't really necessarily even need to know what rows are a specific date. It's using something to be able to say, like, here's the whole spreadsheet, but go through and filter it based on this criteria, which would give me a specific
right
group, right?
And again, this is something that the spreadsheet system is optimized to do. It knows how to do this as part of the formula. there's no need to have the LLM, which is bad at that sort of thing,
Yep.
identify the small range to use. I've just told it where the range of data is, and it knows the best way to look up and handle the data. Because I could also equally well ask a question along the lines of, what date did I weigh the most? What date was I the heaviest? And that's a very different lookup system
Right.
than an average between two dates. Or what date in April was I the heaviest?
Or have you tried to do like something like a year over year? What was my average difference in weight from this month and this year to this month and a previous year?
I've done it month over month. So I've said, yeah. So, and some of it does depend on how you phrase it. It's good in some ways, but it's not perfect. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing to keep in mind, is that it's not perfect.
But it is pretty amazing. One, you get the generative nature of it, but because it's a large model, it's been trained on so much stuff that it kind of seems like it understands what you're saying, and it's like, oh, I know what you're trying to get to, and then a lot of times it gets it right.
Yes, a lot of times I think of it in terms of a lot of times it can create the pattern that will give a formula that works. Yeah. Because it's designed to handle patterns. I'm not trying to ascribe miracles here.
Yeah.
But I think this is important for developers to think about is, think about what these tools are good at. They're good at patterns. They're good at transforming things from one thing to another. They're good at classifying and identifying.
Yep.
Let's take advantage of the system for those things.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't necessarily understand exactly how we understand sentences, or how we process natural language.
Let's not go into how do humans deal with this versus how are the machines doing it. I don't want to get into that. I'm not a linguist. I'm not a philosopher.
Yeah. Well, I'm just, I guess my point is that I don't necessarily understand how it works on my side of things, and I don't necessarily totally understand how it works on the language side of things for the models. But you don't have to understand exactly how it works for it to necessarily be useful. If you can figure out the prompts to get the patterns, to get the things that you're interested in, then that's good. That we can develop off of that.
Yes, but I think I would also say, though, you need to at least know a little. Yeah. So knowing, for example, that it's really good at dealing with language things, but not dealing with math things.
Exactly.
Led me down the path to say, okay, I'm going to have it strictly work as transformers. I'm not going to have it try to do the math because it's not good at that. I think understanding what these large language models are good at and what they're really good at, and limiting it to those things, I think is the right approach to working with the LLMs. And I think what we're starting to see are the tools like VoiceFlow and like LangChain say these tools are really good at specific things.
Right.
Other tools are really good at these other things. How do we connect them together?
So I do have a question, and I don't know if anybody else tried this at this particular hackathon, or if you just kind of what your thought is, because VoiceFlow can call APIs. And because LangChain is code, and it can use an LLM, and it can do other things, it can use what's called tools or other things that would be good at math or that would be good at other things. What do you see a possibility in the future of using VoiceFlow to connect to LangChain as it is?
Well, I'd remind you that 3 weeks ago, I already forgot which episode exactly. That's exactly what we did. We followed the VoiceFlow tutorial. That's true. On how to connect it to LangChain.
I'm trying to think I'll have to go back and look at that one, because now I'm trying to remember exactly what was the VoiceFlow part of that.
So this was back at episode 144, Experiments with LangChain Part 2. what it did was it built an express server that ran the LangChain code. And on the voice flow side, we had two options. The first was that we could have it index a URL. So you'd give it a URL, it would send it to the API, which would scrape that URL and load it into a vector database. Or you could ask a question, and that question would send it to the API that was running LangChain, which would send the query off to get its embeddings, feed that into the vector database, get the result, and send the result back through VoiceFlow.
That's right. It was using the chatbot, or the voice bot would be the voice input for some type of a search that would do a semantic search against a group of documents that were indexed based on embeddings in the vector database store. Okay.
Exactly. And since we did that, they've revised it a little bit more, and they've hinted that this is a feature that's actually going to be built into VoiceFlow in the future.
Yeah, because basically what they ended up doing is they ended up wrapping all of LangChain into an API, and because you can call APIs from VoiceFlow, then that's what it is. Yeah. So that's interesting to see if they can pull some more of that in, so that you don't necessarily have to wrap it, because there are tools that visual tools that are built on top of LangChain. And I attended a webinar a few weeks ago about that. So I know that there are visual tools. So that would be interesting to see if you can start pulling in things like embeddings or agents or tools or other things like that into
more directly.
Yeah, directly from the VoiceFlow palette onto your canvas to then make access to some of these other things. That would be interesting to see.
Yeah, it would be interesting. And I think that's kind of the direction that VoiceFlow is going. I'm not sure they're exactly layering it on top of LangChain, although clearly they know about LangChain. But I could easily see them adding more and more of those, the equivalent of what I did as a blue box.
Yes.
And have things like, this is where we're going to get an embedding from some text. And this is where we're going to make it so that you can make a call to a vector database, and you select which vector database and fill in parameters, so give you that kind of control over it. I think the advantage is that VoiceFlow is already ahead when it comes to all of those bits, while others are mostly focusing on layering on top of LangChain.
Yeah.
VoiceFlow has here's how we collaborate, and here's how you save this file, and here's how you test it, and here's how you do all of these other things.
Right.
And I'm really excited to see where VoiceFlow goes with this, because it's clear they have a focus on AI, but their focus on AI is making that available to people that don't understand AI.
Yeah, and we've had conversations before about the kind of this whole world of AI didn't just happen 6 months ago, or it's been around for a long time, but it seems to be a different group of people, different programming languages, like primarily Python, and now trying to make those things available to developers that are used to doing JavaScript or other things like that. That's going to open up AI for a whole large group of developers to use, and those that are focusing kind of on that that ability to make AI easy and useful is something that's just going to be a big advantage to those that are wanting to integrate AI into their products.
What I think we're going to be seeing more and more of, and we kind of got some hints about this last week, is that historically AI has been in the domain of the AI ML people. So that's this segment all the way out here that understand the details of models, and usually are working in Python, and they've got the numerical computing elements to it. So they've got a bunch of the data processing, all of that. And recently, OpenAI kind of opened it up to the other side,
Yeah.
so that anybody can just open up a chat window and do stuff with it and, give it prompts and get results back that are amazing. And we've got this big middle chunk here.
Yeah.
And that's the space where voice flow and LangChain and others are starting to move into. And I think, as we see Google and Azure doing more and more in this space, you're going to see that open up to the whole range of developers.
Right.
And that's that's the area I'm really excited about.
Yeah. And I just remember, coming into this field, oh, I can't remember, 2016, however long ago that was, right? And not knowing how to train a model, but it was really easy to, format a JSON file with these are the intents and these are the slots and and then I said train or build, and this model was there, and then I used it, and it's got to be something where it's that easy
Right.
to do. And not to say that there aren't still space for other types of specialties and fine tuning and for other things, but to make it something that was that easy that I could train something and then use it,
Right.
just really opened up this whole thing for me.
Having those set of people down at the most technical end, we're always going to have people down at, a more technical end, even stuff that we've done in the past, there's always been people who were getting more dirty than we were. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, thinking about how, as we started getting into voice, yes, we knew that somewhere there was text to speech and speech to text, and there were the intent processing, and we were training models, but these were things that we didn't have to worry about. We could focus on applying the knowledge that we already had in new and different ways.
Right.
And I think that's going to be the beauty of where these tools need to go, is saying you are coming into this with your understanding of your business focus. You understand your business domain. You understand a wide range of tools that will help you work in that domain. You understand customer requirements. You understand, lots and lots of things. And now you have one new tool to add to that mix. And this tool helps you deal with the fuzzy side of the world, which is, lots of it.
Yeah, well, and it really brings it just really makes it even more accessible to bring natural language to whatever it is that you're doing, and that natural language could be text or it could be speech to text, right?
Or it could be other things. It could be images.
Yep.
Are there models out there that will take images and do something with them, caption them? What do you do with that? How do you combine that with other things? So there are the models that we are relying on people to build, and that's wonderful. How do we take advantage of those models? What can we do with them?
Yeah.
And I was gonna say, and I think that's what's going to be occupying, I feel like, a lot of my time. Yeah. Going forward.
I feel like there's a lot to learn and there's a lot to do. It's exciting. It's really been fun to try to, take where I'm at and figure out where things are going. Cause it's not really throwing away what we've done, but it's building on.
Right. I think as voice developers, we have a better understanding of what is it, what does that human interaction need to look like?
Yeah.
And how do we take advantage of that human interaction in different modalities? Right now, chat is all the rage, but we know that there's more to chat. We still know that, responses need to be brief and quick. So we have a lot of our experience that I think we can still take and apply to this new field.
Exactly. Well, this we can probably keep talking, but this has been a really good conversation. Alan, I appreciate you sharing your experience at the hackathon, and just kind of what you learned and behind the scenes how that worked. So thank you for that.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I love talking about this, obviously, and you're right. We probably could keep going on. And I'd love to hear what people think, and if people have questions about, how do you build these different prompts? I'd love to talk about it more.
Yeah, and we're just learning and exploring this ourselves, and I at least have to call this out. That might be the last demo I see of Voodoo Drive on Google Assistant.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that one another time.
We will. Sorry, I didn't mean to bring that up, but I just wanted to acknowledge that there's a lot of effort and exploring and learning, and like you say, this has been many years through multiple technologies, and it's pretty exciting just to see that you're sticking with it and figuring out how we could talk to our data and in this case ask questions and get summaries and just kind of find out a lot more about stuff that's important to us, the things that we track, that we log, that's our personal data.
Yep. I feel like these are important things to me, so I'm gonna keep poking where I can and build new systems around them.
Yep.
So, as always, love to hear what other people think. You can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn. We're on the Alexa Slack channel, and we'd love to hear what you have to say, and we'll talk about all of this stuff more and more, I am quite sure, on a future episode of Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Take care, my friend.
You as well. Thank you so much.